You think you're defending yourself, but you're actually surrendering. There's a strange thing most people don't notice. Your partner accuses you of something unfair. A colleague makes a passive-aggressive comment. A friend misunderstands you and lashes out. And before you even process it, you do the most familiar thing. You explain. You say, "That's not what I meant." You try to clarify, and then you tell them they got it wrong. You talk a lot, driven by one very human, very primal desire to be understood. But here's the problem. The moment you begin to explain, you don't realize it, but you just gave away the one thing more powerful than being understood: power itself. We grow up believing something naive, that if we're honest enough, transparent enough, reasonable enough, people will eventually get it. And once they do, the conflict will disappear. But life doesn't work like that, because life isn't a court of truth. It's a psychological chess game where the one who speaks first is often the one who stands lower. When you say, "I'm not like that," you think you're clarifying. But what you're really doing is granting legitimacy to the accusation. You're telling the other person that their frame deserves your attention. You're letting them define you. And no matter how articulate your words are, you're already playing from behind. Machiavelli once said, "He who explains submits." That's not just political strategy. It's psychological warfare. A Machiavellian man doesn't seek to be understood. He makes people afraid to misunderstand him, because he knows transparency makes you predictable, and what's predictable can be manipulated. He understands that silence isn't weakness, it's refusal, a refusal to enter a game that was never designed for him to win. That's why there are people who can walk into a room and say nothing yet command it, not because they're liked, but because no one dares to make the wrong assumption. They don't define themselves. They force others to tread lightly around their image. And in that ambiguity, power is born. When you react, you tell the world the other person is worth reacting to. When you explain, you drop yourself into a position that begs for approval. But when you remain still, unbothered, composed, you send a message far louder than words. You don't belong in their frame. You live on a different level. People think silence is agreement, but silence is often rejection. Rejection of the bait, rejection of the frame, rejection of emotional games that were never yours to play. That's why the ones who never explain are the ones others fear the most. Because you can't manipulate a man you can't predict. But what happens if you keep explaining anyway? What happens if you still believe that saying enough will earn you forgiveness? That's when you need to face a harder truth, that every time you speak to defend yourself, you're falling deeper into a trap you didn't even see coming. And that's exactly when power begins to leave you inch by inch. The more you explain, the more you get controlled. Most people believe that explaining is a form of strength, that when you speak up to clarify yourself, you're taking control. But look closer, and you'll see a harsh truth. Every word you offer in defense isn't a step forward, it's a step backward. You're not asserting your position, you're giving it away. When you explain, you're not just talking about yourself, and you're silently agreeing that the other person has the right to question you, the right to judge you, the right to decide whether or not you deserve to exist in the way you are. You're handing them the judge's seat, and you're the one who built the courtroom. You think you're clarifying things, but what you're really doing is asking for permission to exist. You're begging to be allowed to stay, and that is the fastest way to lose respect. In the workplace, this plays out clearly. One man gets challenged by his boss over an unfinished idea. He stumbles into defense mode, talking non-stop, trying to prove he was right. The entire room watches in silence, not because they're learning from him, but because he's now a defendant on trial. He's no longer the guy with a vision. He's a man trying not to look guilty. Meanwhile, in the other corner of the room, another man gets nudged with a subtle comment. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't explain. He keeps his posture, his eye contact steady, his breathing calm. That silence becomes louder than any justification. The room doesn't push further. Nobody knows exactly what he's thinking, and in that uncertainty, power quietly grows. That's where you need to understand something called frame control. Every social interaction happens within a frame, a storyline that defines who's in charge. Whoever builds the frame holds the power. And when you respond inside someone else's frame, you're already playing their game. You cannot win a game where the playing field isn't yours. And smart people know this. They don't rush to be right. They don't scramble to protect their image. They do something far more powerful. They hold their position. They control their tempo. And they let the other person's frame collapse under its own weight. That's the twist most people never see. Strong individuals don't fight to win. They win by refusing to fight. They confuse their opponents not by being louder, but by staying completely still. And that stillness becomes a wall the attacker cannot climb. So the question becomes, if you don't react, if you don't defend, if you refuse to step into the frame they created for you, then what protects you? What response is stronger than words? That answer isn't sound, it's presence. Silence, delivered at the right moment, makes the whole room hold its breath. There's a kind of silence that most people never truly understand. It's not avoidance. It's not weakness. It's not the silence of someone who doesn't know how to respond. It's a different kind of silence, one that's intentional, calculated, and razor sharp. And because of that, it carries a kind of power that no explanation ever could. A Machiavellian man knows this. When attacked, he doesn't rush to defend. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't raise his voice or scramble for a response. He just looks calmly, evenly, his eyes steady, his breath measured. No anger, no disdain, no need to prove anything. And in that single, quiet moment, he says more than any argument ever could. Because people can push back against words, but they don't know how to deal with a silence that doesn't break. They can't read you, can't predict, can't control. And in that ambiguity, they lose their grip. Picture a meeting room. Someone makes a veiled jab. Everyone turns to look at you, waiting for your response. But you don't react. You don't defend. You don't smirk or shift in your seat. You meet their eyes with steady calm. That pause, just a few seconds long, stretches in everyone's mind. Because when there's no defense, people start questioning the accusation itself. Your silence becomes the loudest voice in the room. Or imagine a social gathering. Someone cracks a half joke at your expense. Laughter follows. But you don't join in. You take a sip of your drink, unfazed. The moment passes, and suddenly the energy shifts. The room doesn't side with the loud voice, they lean toward the one who didn't flinch. Not because they understand you better, but because you made them feel something heavier. A presence that couldn't be laughed off. On social media, this is even clearer. You're publicly called out. Everyone waits for a reaction, but nothing comes. And as time passes, the anticipation turns into discomfort, then doubt, and eventually, fear. Because in a world that reacts to everything instantly, the one who doesn't commands the most control. That's the power of ambiguity. When people can't place you, they start projecting. And the mind, when forced to guess, rarely assumes innocence. They'll project what they fear. They'll imagine hidden strength, cold calculation, dangerous awareness. You haven't said a word, but suddenly, you're living rent-free in their heads. Not because of what you explained, but because of what you refused to explain. And that's where something begins to shift. If you don't respond, if you don't step into the noise, if you stay outside the verbal tug-of-war, then what happens to the one who attacked you? Do they maintain their power, or do they begin to unravel in the silence you left behind? The more the attacker speaks, the more unstable they appear. There's a psychological pattern that often goes unnoticed, but once you see it, you'll spot it everywhere. When someone doesn't get the reaction they expected, they don't back down, they don't retreat, they escalate, they repeat their argument, they raise their voice, they add more details, they scan the room for support, searching for validating eyes. And the more they do it, the more fragile they begin to look, because their calm starts to crack. They're no longer fighting you. They're fighting the silence you left behind. That silence isn't empty. It's a mirror. And in that mirror, the attacker doesn't see you. They see themselves. They see their own irritation, their insecurity, their fear of being ignored. And the more they speak, the more those fears are exposed. That's why in many confrontations, the silent one doesn't need to strike. They simply need to hold the frame, because the attacker will tear themselves apart trying to fill it. Picture a moment in a relationship. A woman turns to her boyfriend and says coldly, "You don't care about me anymore." She expects a reaction. She wants him to protest, to plead, to prove his love. But he doesn't do any of that. He just looks at her, calm, composed, no defensiveness, no judgment, no emotional recoil. At first, she's confused, then a little more agitated, but slowly, the silence forces her to hear her own voice. She begins to wonder, was I overreacting? Was I just trying to get a rise out of him? And eventually, something unexpected happens. She softens. She adjusts her tone. Maybe she even apologizes. Why? Because she realizes he's not playing the same emotional game. And in that one-sided game, she's the one losing ground. This is what we call overplay. When someone doesn't receive the response they're chasing, they overcompensate. They push harder, they get louder. But that emotional intensity turns into volatility. They've stepped into a battlefield with no map, and the farther they go, the more they lose control. Here's the twist. Their collapse wasn't caused by anything you did. You didn't attack. You didn't defend. You simply refused to give them the one thing they needed: control over your state of mind. And that, right there, makes you more dangerous than any reaction ever could. So what if, in a certain moment, you do have to speak? What if silence alone isn't enough? Is there a way to use your voice without giving up your position? You don't need to untangle the situation. You just need to reframe it. Silence isn't always the perfect response, and there are moments when you have to speak. Not because you've lost control, but because the moment demands a reply. The question is, how do you speak without falling into the trap of defending yourself? How do you use words without giving away your power? The answer lies in reframing the narrative. Weak people try to untangle the mess. They get into the details. They explain. They try to fix perceptions. But the ones who understand the game don't do that. They don't repair. They don't justify. They shift the frame. They change the lens through which others are seeing the situation until the original attack no longer makes sense. It's a psychological technique you can call narrative judo. You don't resist the force of the attack. You use it to unbalance the attacker. You don't block, you redirect. You don't argue. You reshape. You give people a new emotional context, one where the original accusation loses its grip. Example. Someone says, "You're so arrogant." The average person replies, "No, I'm just trying to express myself." But someone who controls the room says, "Confidence seems to make a lot of people uncomfortable." A calm, simple sentence. Yet it instantly shifts attention away from you and onto the one making the accusation. Or they say, "You're fake." You don't deny it. You calmly respond. People usually say that when they can't control you anymore. That doesn't prove you right or wrong. It plants emotional uncertainty in the person attacking you and forces them to pause. These aren't comebacks to win arguments. They're tools to keep people from gaining control over your state of mind. You're not trying to prove a point. You're shifting their emotional position, making them question what they just said. Real power doesn't come from being right. It comes from making others unsure that they're right and even more unsure that they understand you at all. When you apply narrative judo with precision, something interesting starts to happen. The attacker loses interest. They don't even know what they're attacking anymore. Every time you respond, it's not a defense. It's a cold cloud that drops over the conversation. They slow down. They second guess. Sometimes, they even start defending themselves. And when you can hold that posture consistently without panic, without needing approval, you go beyond defense. You enter a space where you control the entire environment, the tone, the pace, the emotional rhythm. Not through explanation, but through calm direction, through a presence that's never reacting, only reshaping. When you stop reacting, you start controlling how others see you. There's a threshold not everyone crosses. It's the moment you stop feeling the need to explain yourself. You stop clarifying. You stop trying to be understood. Outsiders might see it as coldness, even arrogance. But in truth, it's the clearest sign that you've moved beyond the need for emotional approval. You've stopped living in the narratives others create for you. Someone who no longer defends themselves isn't careless. They've simply evolved past the need to prove who they are. They no longer ask for space, they become the space. They no longer demand respect, they walk in a way that commands it without a word. At that level, you're not the one being judged. You're the one setting the tone. Every move you make, every pause, glance, or silence starts shifting the room. People speak more carefully. They hesitate to assume. They may not know what you're thinking, but they know one thing for sure: they don't want to get it wrong with you. And here's what makes the difference. It's not about reputation, it's about presence. Reputation is what people say when you're not around. It's fragile. It bends with rumors, jealousy, emotion. But presence, your aura, is what they feel when you walk into the room. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't beg to be understood. It speaks without speaking. And that's what people really remember. It's like this: reputation is what people hear, but aura is what they sense, and that sticks far deeper. You don't build that by defending yourself. You build it by holding your frame, by owning the space you take up, and by never chasing approval. The Machiavellian doesn't obsess over fixing his image. He doesn't try to control every opinion. Instead, he lets the mystery do the talking. People don't fear the man who explains himself. They fear the one who never needs to. Because when you can't be read, you can't be framed. And when people don't know what you'll do next, they stop trying to pull you down. They start adjusting themselves around you. That's when something shifts. You no longer have to react. Every step you take, every moment of stillness becomes a quiet signal. Not a plea for support, but a statement that says, without saying anything at all, you don't get to define me. And when you walk into any space with that kind of energy, people don't go silent out of politeness. They go silent out of respect and a little fear. You're not reclaiming power anymore. You are the power. You're not fighting for the frame. You are the frame. And once you get there, you don't need to speak to defend yourself anymore, because your presence alone makes people think twice before speaking your name.